Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Rest is Policing podcast. My name is Martin Buhagiar. Thank you, as always, for joining us on YouTube or Spotify. I'm joined, as always, by Lee Broadbent. Hi, Lee. How are you?
As you can imagine, Martin, I've had a very, very busy week.
And let's start there, actually, because obviously, press release went out on Monday morning, didn't it? And I think you were working on it over the weekend. And so, tell us how your week started and when the work began and what's actually happened.
Yeah, so like most weeks, my week started last week. We, having received the legal advice back from Lee Day, we took a bit of time just to sit down with it, weigh it up, work through it, and then formalise a strategy going forward. From that, we decided that the best course of action first would be to write to the government to outline the basis of our case and the strength of our arguments, and to invite them to make changes to Section 64 of the Police Act 1996, overturning the blanket ban on preventing police officers from joining or forming their own unions, and essentially notifying them that if they didn't take that step, then we stand ready to take legal action.
Brilliant.
Having wrote that letter, the government now have 14 days on which to reply, so we're in a little bit of a lull period. But we decided as well to launch or relaunch the campaign Breaking the Monopoly on the Monday morning, fresh launch on the back of the pre-action protocol letter, and obviously the work we've been doing behind the scenes for a press release, and therefore we've got now the build-up to hopefully raise £6,000 within 27 days. I think we've got left.
Yeah. And you're already up to like over $2,000 at the moment, aren't we? So within a couple of days.
I think it's 2,600. So I mean, I'm really, really happy with the way that that's going, because the advice that we were given by Crowd Justice is that we should be aiming for about 50% of the initial target within the first 3 days, because that's when your major momentum is. So we're just over 48 hours, and we're already we're about 80% of the way to our 3,000 initial 3-day target, but we're well on our way to raising 6,000. And I think it's important to stress that the reason we're set it at 6,000 presently is because, given the strength of our legal argument, we think, or we believe, that the government will want to try and enter some form of negotiation. We're hoping, like I said, that's what they'll do, and that they'll make the consequential changes to the legislation, and that £6,000 will cover the administrative back and forth and legislative work through with the government and Lee Day. If obviously that isn't the position, and we find that the government indicate that actually they want to take this to court to test it, then we'll stretch that target to go fund our judicial review.
Yeah, it's interesting that hopefully it won't come to that, because it feels like it would make sense for the government to get around a table and want to have a chat and to maybe avoid going to judicial review. Surely, you'd think.
You would think so, and I mean, I'm quietly confident, based on the conversations that I've had with others, that we are slightly pushing on an open door. I don't think that anybody in the right mind can sit down and honestly say that the Federation is working as it was intended to work. The history of failings over the last decade or more that we set out in our Breaking the Monopoly report, or paper, should I say, that just laid bare the catastrophic state of the organisation. And I think that's recognised with government, and certainly with some police chiefs that I've met and spoken to personally. The Federation just carry no weight anymore. There's a general recognition that it is not acting as it should act, and therefore it would make sense for the government to allow that choice in this area and to break up the monopoly, which I would argue has driven the Federation to this position. Like the water companies, where there's a lack of regulation within this sector, where there is a lack of competition, then you will just get complacency. You'll get that lack of investment, because there is no motivation or incentive to better yourself.
Water company analogy: you'll get sewage in your water, in your streams, which is I guess what.
But what we're getting is sewage in our representation. I won't swear.
Yeah, absolutely. You stop me from doing so as well. There's a great quote from Mandy Batal, the employment lawyer at Lee Day, who you're obviously working with, and I think just reading that, just to set out the case would be good for anybody tuning in that is not sure about the whys and wherefores in terms of what you're doing. This case raises a clear human rights issue. The blanket ban on police officers forming or joining a trade union dates back to 1919 and is entirely out of step with modern standards. There is no justifiable reason why police officers should be treated differently from firefighters, doctors, or prison staff, all of whom can unionise. The government now has a choice: engage in reform or face a likely defeat in the courts. And that's the point, isn't it? That surely the government will know if this went to court, if this goes to judicial review, they would lose for those very reasons. Why should police officers be treated differently to firefighters, doctors, prison staff who can unionise?
Correct. I mean, and this is one of the arguments that we have laid out to the government in that the blanket prohibition that is currently applied. If you look at the legislation on Article 11, the plethora of the case law and existing unionisation of police forces across Europe, that we would argue that the government have a very, very narrow interpretation. They have to interpret the law very, very narrow, and therefore the justifications of providing a blanket ban have to be very strong, and they aren't. There are other ways in which you can regulate policing activity, such as, one of the key instances is that the police should not be a political entity. We should remain apolitical. But you can regulate that without a blanket ban on unionising. You could quite easily say that police officers are free to join and form their own unions, provided that they do not join or engage in political activity, support any political party, etc., etc. There's no requirement for that blanket ban.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because obviously, I've said on this podcast before, I'm not trying to plug my old articles, but I remember writing an old article about the Police Federation being set up in 1919, and at the time how that was fit for purpose. But as you say, as it says in the press release, it's the current law is incompatible with Article 11 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which protects the right to freedom of association, including the right to form and join trade unions. So what might have worked 100 years ago, or more than 100 years ago now, surely wouldn't necessarily be fit for purpose. I'm not talking about the organisation, but the Article 11, the law of which protects or allows the Federation to monopolise police staff representation. Given where we are now in 2025 and the different laws that we have for human rights and the European Convention, as we said, it surely isn't. It can't be fit for purpose anymore.
No, it can't be. I mean, and the government in itself are arguing that workers' rights need to be enhanced. There's a bill working its way through Parliament, the Employment Rights Bill, right at this present moment, that we think, with certain amendments, could introduce the ability for police officers to form and join their own unions. Their own arguments in relation to how other public sector workers are currently being restricted from basic elements of strike action, etc. The barriers being set too high, the right to strike, the right to associate. They're saying that fundamentally the balances were shifted under the Tory government, and they're going to correct it by the Employment Rights Bill. Well, essentially, you then can't argue that the blanket bans and prohibitions that you were placing on police officers are in any way fair.
It's a really interesting one, as you say. With that going through as well, it's hard to see any other response from the Home Office other than to say, okay, yeah, let's get together and have a conversation. It would make perfect sense. In terms of what this would mean for police officers, I've been asked by a few people in the media just from following the release of your release, Lee. What does this mean in terms of, what would you want? Would you look to form a union that could strike? What does it mean for industrial rights for police officers? What's the long game here? Do we know? Are we that far down the road?
Yeah, but I think it's important that we separate the two, because ultimately there are two different arguments there. As part of the legal advice, I did ask for advice on the right to take industrial action in some forms, and received advice back on that. And both sets of the advice under the Article 11 and obviously the right to take industrial action, right to strike, didn't close the door on the argument. There were avenues that could be pursued. It happens to be that the Article 11 argument is the strongest argument. It is very strong. As I've mentioned, there's a whole range of existing case law across Europe. Matley versus France is one of that would stick out in terms of a member of the French. Is it the gendarmerie? Do you pronounce it like
Yeah.
Yeah. So a member of the gendarmerie was seeking the right to form a union. The French government were arguing that no, you can't join a union because you're a member of the armed forces. They argued that actually most of our functions are policing related functions. And this went to an argument, it went to court. And what the court decided on was the fact that whether it was in the police or was in the military, a blanket ban could not be justified. So it argues that if it couldn't stand for military personnel in the terms of the gendarmerie, then it wouldn't stand for policing personnel. And therefore, your case law in Europe, and the fact that you will see in very many Baltic countries, in Spain, in Italy, and other areas, there are more unions and associations that police officers can join. Therefore, the government in England, when interpreting Article 11, have a very, very narrow margin of appreciation, as it says in legal work. What it essentially means is they have very, very narrow position on which to implement Article 11. In order to justify the blanket prohibition, their justifications would have to be very, very strong. And they just simply, as we've discussed, don't believe that the justifications are strong because there are other ways of curtailing political activity in policing or curtailing industrial rights action within policing other than a blanket ban on the right to form and join unions. The aspect of whether police officers can take industrial action, I mean, that is another argument. Again, I would argue that there is some case law within Europe, albeit it's a smaller body of case law, and it is very, very. There's a balance to be struck. There are some Baltic nations, Nordic nations, that do allow police officers and military personnel to both unionise and strike. But then there was the recent case in Spain, in the Basque Country, where the officers were seeking to take strike action, and the European Courts of Justice ruled that that would be unlawful, and that the government's prohibition on strike action would be lawful because they provided an essential state function. So when you look at the margin of appreciation that the government have in curtailing an officer's rights to take industrial action, it's much broader. Therefore, the justifications can be much broader, and the argument is much more difficult to take home. I'm not saying it's an impossible argument, because where at the minute we would argue that we do not have fair arbitration in terms of our pay, or the way in which we can bring disputes to the employer's attention in a fair process, we would argue that has been curtailed by the introduction of the PRRB, the Police Review and Remuneration Pay Body. That takes away fair arbitration. So that then weakens a justification for the government. Not saying that it removes it, but there's an argument to be pursued. But we had to make a decision as whether now was the right time to pursue both arguments, because one argument, the Article 11 argument, could be resolved very, very quickly. The other argument is likely to drag on and drag on and drag on. So we had the choice to make: is do we resolve the one argument that we have, end the monopoly, break the monopoly that the Federation hold, completely revolutionise the way that police officers are represented in this country, allow us to form our own union and organisation, and then should we want to visit the question of the right to take industrial action and the right to strike, then we start building a war chest as a new union association, and we might have that fight down the line.
Wow. In terms of the response, I know you've had a busy. We're recording this on Wednesday for those listening in. So how busy has it been Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday since the release has gone out? What's the reaction been?
Manic. I've literally finished the day job 7:3, and then right from 3:00 I'm on the campaign, whether that's answering messages from people that they've been sending in, whether it's getting back to people interested in press. And I was speaking to Police Oracle on Friday. I know you've been busy as well, pulling the press strings, and we've got a few things lined up. Speaking to other officers that are interested in unionising and joining any new association that we may create, and that's Federation officers, ex and present, that are seeking to support, because they too do not believe that the Federation is fit for purpose. So it's a really, it's an exciting time, but it's a very, very busy time.
It's going to be interesting, I guess, just to talk about the Police Federation. When we had Rich Cook on a few weeks ago, he was saying that obviously they'd had the vote in terms of industrial action, and it was overwhelmingly in favour, but nothing's happened since then. Do you think with what's happening now, with what you're doing, what we do, that might force a reaction from the Police Federation? Do you think that could happen, that you might see a response from them in any way, shape or form, in terms of not like for like because they can't, but just in terms of industrial action or moving to try and look like
Potentially, but a campaign of that nature is going to cost money. I mean, let's not forget, we've had under the Federation, we've had 3 ballots on the right to take industrial action. You know, the initial ballot came back in the early, the 2000, late 2000, about 2008, I think it was 2009. There was an initial ballot on the right to take industrial action. Then there was a further ballot in 2012, and then there was a further ballot not too long ago. And on each occasion, the Federation have ignored and sidelined the voice of the membership over their own interests. Partly, I would imagine that would be because if they went or pursued industrial action, then there would have to be some sort of recognition that if they won, then police officers would be treated as any other public sector servant, and therefore it would automatically break the monopoly because it would allow police officers to join other unions, because there would be now no restriction on a police officer taking industrial action, let's say. Therefore, that curtailment has ended. If they feel that curtailment is being threatened, they might want to pull this out of the bag, they might want to pursue it, but then again, they have to balance that against their relationship with government, because at the minute, I'm pretty sure that they'll be doing everything that they can behind the scenes to encourage the government not to engage with any new association or organisation and not to change the legislation, because the monopoly very much benefits them, and it benefits a very, very small number of powerful people at the body and the heart of the organisation, but it disenfranchises and disempowers the masses, the police officers that are subject to the monopoly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does. It certainly felt. I know you've said it on social media a few times that the federation just appears to be talking to itself, doesn't it? It's really got that kind of feel to it at the moment. So, in terms of the letter's gone in, they've got 2 weeks to reply. If they come back, and do you have an idea in your head of what will happen? So, if the Home Office came back and said, "Yeah, okay, yeah, we want to avoid judicial review, we want to avoid a lengthy and costly court case. Let's get together." What then happens? I mean, is it just a series of meetings? I don't know. I don't know if you know, but just for police officers listening into it, what do we think might happen, and what might it look like?
It's new territory, isn't it? So I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, one of the things that we've had to be cautious of, well, I say we, I'm being incredibly cautious on this. There are others that are pushing for us to try and do this. But I'm being incredibly cautious because I've seen the underhand way in which the Federation will work in trying to throw in complaints and discredit you. So one of the things at the minute that we've been looking at is forming another body, raising contributions essentially, and then going out obviously to tender to insurance companies, etc., to get those other products. But my concern is doing that at the same time as running the campaign to break the monopoly and essentially argue for unionisation and the ability to influence police officers' terms, conditions of service, etc. Would that put us in breach of Section 64? Because the law as it stands is still in place. And I don't want to blare the lines on this regard and try and set up and raise another organisation, only have it undermined by complaints that will be in breach of the legislation and acting in a way that causes disaffection to the service. And therefore, I think one of the first things that I would want to do if we meet and sit down with government is establish a principle where we can start putting the groundwork into build an organisation whilst we're working through any legislative changes, because it's imperative for officers that if we get to a position where the law is changed, that there is something in place which is fit for purpose, or at least will be fit for purpose in a relatively short period of time. Now, I mean, I'm confident that enough officers would start contributing to that service. I mean, let's not forget, there are 145,000 police officers across the UK that each contribute circa £25 a month to the Federation. It is in receipt of almost, I think it's over £40 million a year at this point. If a fraction of those officers just diverted those resources to ourselves, we'd be up and running relatively quickly. And with the models that we're looking at around legal funding, etc., both on and off duty, we think we'd be in a solid position in a relatively short period of time. So rest assured, the groundwork is going on, the work is behind. We're just not at the stage of where we can say, look, we're going to launch this new organisation. This is what it's going to be called. Start sending your subscriptions to us. We're putting the groundwork in, but we're just not quite there yet. But I would hope, as I say, certainly within the initial meetings, there's an understanding of what we're trying to achieve. Choice. Ultimately, that's what we want. Choice. How much choice is down to the government, whether they want to say choice could be limited to 2 3, 4 organisations, or it could be opened up across the board, and officers could then have the right to form and join other unions, etc. That is in the gift of the government. My campaign is solely to create the space for choice, and in that regard, I think that's where the conversations would need to be directed.
It's really important, isn't it, to say people may well remember our first podcast, and they can scroll back on YouTube or Spotify to listen when we were the first podcast, Breaking Monopoly. At the time when you first started launching your campaign, you were potentially looking at breaking the monopoly and setting up a new police union, police staff association. At the time, now you've been very fluid. You've been able to adapt and move for that reason. The reasons you've just given out. So this campaign breaks the monopoly and could allow lots of other people to set up different staff associations. So it's a selfless task in itself because you're doing the work for them. So if anyone was out there thinking, and I'm sure there isn't anyone thinking this, but if anyone was thinking this is some sort of power grab, then obviously that this has proved it's exactly not that, isn't it?
No.
You're doing this to break the monopoly. I know we've said that a number of times, but we can't push that enough, because the difference this could make to other organisations being able to set up staff representation for police officers is huge. There's huge opportunity.
There is, and just like with anything, you know, along the way, I might not be everybody's cup of tea. You know, I know I've upset people. You know, we only have to look at the fallout within the pension challenge between myself, Miles, and Paul, etc. There has been complications along the way, and there has been. So I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I wouldn't ever profess to be everybody's cup of tea or choice to be a person leading a new organisation. Therefore, you've got to pivot on what's most important, and the creating the space for choice is more important than being the alternative choice. If people want me and others to lead a new organisation, then they will aptly, when that time comes, contribute to that. If people want others, whether they want to invest in the Black Police Officers Association and Andy George so eloquently champions, again, not everybody's cup of tea, but some people will like that style of representation, and some people will gravitate to that association. Just let's have the conversation. Let's create that choice. As I say, creating the space for choice is more important than being the choice for me. But I'm not ruling out, because it's an area of policing I do absolutely love. Representation of police officers is something I've been passionate about for a very, very long time, and I believe I'm good at it, which helps. But yeah, it's something I would like to continue.
100%. No, you're very good at it. And I think for any police officer listening in, surely you'd want 3 choices rather than 1, or 4 choices rather than 1, because that improves professionalism. It improves the way people work, and improves the way people look after your subs and spend your money, because they know if they do something wrong or get something wrong, people will go, oh, bugger it, I'll go over there then instead. It's only going to help police officers, which is why this is happening, why we're doing it.
Correct, and I would argue that the less choice they have, the more regulation in that area they need as well. I mean, like I said, the current system that we have has no regulation. If you make a complaint against the federation, as we've seen from many people, their own board look at the complaint and assess it before it even moves on to a compliance phase. There's absolutely no way that if you want to hold, let's say, the CEO to account, that you would do so fairly. And if the decision that you got back from the organisation was one that, no, we're not going to take any action, you have got nowhere else to escalate that to, and that can't be right.
No.
There's no independence in that system. There's no regulation, and therefore the monopoly continues and grows.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because throughout this period, we always talk about people saying they were going to buy you a pint and whatever else. We've had a lot of people on social media who do say, if I had a choice, I'd go elsewhere. I guess this is their chance now, isn't it? The time is here. So in terms of people supporting the campaign, £6,000 isn't a huge amount of money needed to raise. How can people support the campaign? What do they need to do?
Well, any donation, great or small, was usually welcome. You know, if you're considering a cup of coffee tomorrow at Starbucks, as opposed to buying that £5 macchiato or whatever it is you take your fancy to, throw us £5, because the chances are that you'll have much greater benefit in the future from the choice that we'll be able to bring than the instant gratification of that coffee, as fantastic as it may be. Go back to the nick and get a granulated Nescafe. Yeah, any contribution, great or small, is greatly appreciated. The average contribution that we've had so far is about £25, which is a monthly subscription to the Federation. There's always going to be a little bit of pain before for long-term gain. And the pain, unfortunately, comes in this regard in officers having to self-fund and self-finance their ability to be able to choose. That is the pain at the minute. And I get that there's a pinch on everybody's pockets. It's incredibly difficult out there. But if you can find that £1, £5, or £25 down the back of the sofa, please throw it our way, because we will put it to good use.
And where can they find it's on crowdfund, isn't it? Crowd Justice.
Crowd Justice, yeah. So we switched to Crowd Justice for a compliance reason over most things. One, it enabled all the funds that are raised to be directed to Lee Day and the challenge to break the monopoly. Therefore, it would open the invitation up to other unions, other staff associations who may want to contribute to the campaign because they have an interest in seeing the monopoly broken up. It allows them to donate to that campaign also, and it would set that money aside, and they didn't want to invest in the new any new organisation that we were looking to build. Also, for the compliance purposes, when I had to sit down and remove the funds to send to Lee Day, I had to produce a manual document of names and donations, and then account for any donation that was above a certain threshold, etc., to comply with money laundering codes that via the Solicitors Regulation Authority. Unfortunately, GoFundMe had removed that function from their platform to automate it. So it would have been incredibly administrative and burdensome on me going forward. Switching to Crowd Justice, it's a platform that was set up for solicitors by solicitors. Therefore, the compliance is done at source, and the funds are handed directly at source. It never touches a third party other than Crowd Justice, and it goes straight to the legal firm. So it was a no-brainer in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, all that's left for us to say is that, police officers listening to this, to those who've been frustrated with staff representation for them, I guess, as we say, it's time, it's money where mouth is time, isn't it, really? So if you want change, this is where it happens. And for what, I think if you go back 6 months, we were thinking it was going to be a larger sum to bring a judicial review, but we're at the point now where that could be avoided. So it makes sense for people to support this now and to get behind this movement as soon as they can, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I know it's an irony, but the quicker we raise the funds, the quicker we show the government that we actually have support behind this, then the more likely we are to be able to settle it without reverting to full legal action. I'm not saying that will be the case. The government, they could choose a path just to be stubborn. But the more people that they believe are behind this, the more people that they see wanting to create choice, wanting to create that space for choice, more likely they are to enter into to debate and recourse without legal action.
Brilliant. Well, look, Lee, you've had a busy week, so we'll leave it there and let you have some time with your family, I guess, as well, because although you're on holiday next week, aren't you, Elise?
Yeah, I'm not gonna say how long, because I'm a police officer. I don't want people to know my house is empty. Although it's not. I've got a house sitter, but yeah, we're going to France for a period, so we're gonna have hopefully a few wines, good cheese, nice meat.
And I think just for listeners as well, just to say this, we might have a break next week. We'll give Lee a break from the podcast, but we'll send some clips out to keep people busy, and then we'll be back with more guests. But look, Lee, as always, thanks for co-hosting this and joining us as always, and for your work this week. I know it's been a busy week for you. And thanks to our listeners as always for tuning in on Spotify or YouTube. We do appreciate it. And I think from my point of view, I'd urge you, if you're thinking about supporting this campaign, to just get involved and give what you can, because I've worked with plenty of police officers in my time at Oracle and the Police Federation who've all said the same thing. And I think it is, as I say, now's the time to get behind this campaign and to potentially drive it forward. So fingers crossed we can do that fairly quickly. But look, thank you, Lee. Enjoy the rest of your week if you can. I know it's going to be busy for you, and we'll see you all next time on The Rest is Policing.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Martin. Bye, everybody. Stay safe.